Welcome, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. Today is the second in our Exploring Energy Workshop series. There'll be one more on December 4th, all about wind energy. But today we're talking about bioplastics and polymers and normal plastics. And I'm super excited to introduce you to Lucas. Lucas is a current sophomore at UW-Madison, and he is going to be walking you through the workshop today. So thanks again for coming. If you have any questions throughout the workshop, feel free to unmute yourself and ask, or you can put it in the chat if you like that better. We're excited that you're here.
Awesome. Thank you, Allison. And again, thank you all for taking time out of your Friday to be here today and to learn about plastics. So to start things off, just give a little background on the Wisconsin Energy Institute. So WEI is a home for cross-disciplinary energy research in UW-Madison. So here, over 160 scientists study things from agriculture to biofuels to microgrids. And we also offer some energy certificate programs for graduate and undergraduate students. So if you guys are thinking about college and energy interests you, that's something cool that you could check out. And as you can see in the picture on the right, we're located just north of Camp Randall Stadium on the western end of the UW-Madison campus. And in our work, we just want to acknowledge that the land that we reside on is the ancestral home of the Ho-Chunk Nation and 11 other First Nations groups. We also want to recognize that those groups are doing some of the most important and leading work in transitioning to clean energy systems today. And WEI is the primary home of the Great Lakes Bioenergy Research Center. And that is a larger research center where professors from universities all over the country work to find out how to make products sustainably from sustainably grown plants. So first off, we'll just give a bit of review on some basic chemistry concepts. So what are atoms and molecules? Atoms are basically the building blocks of matter. Everything that we see and feel is made up of atoms. And if you guys have seen the periodic table, there's 118 elements on it. And each atom is one of those elements. So here's a molecule we all know very well, H2O, it's water. Molecules are essentially multiple atoms that link together in a variety of ways. And this one is made up of 2 hydrogen atoms, which is the first element, and an oxygen atom. And these things here are dipoles. If you know what they are, you can think about them as we go through this presentation. If you don't worry about it. That's all good. That's just one of the ways that atoms can link together to form these molecules. Looks like we have someone else entering. Awesome. So what are polymers now? Polymers are these really, really long molecules that are made up of smaller molecules called monomers that are chained together. If it helps you guys to know the Latin roots, mono is one, poly means many. Monomers link together to form polymers. And these polymers are everywhere. You can see them all around you. There are so many types of them. Your hair is a polymer, your DNA, the carbohydrates, lipids, and not lipids, fats, and sugars that you eat are all polymers. And nature is really good at making polymers. But today we're going to be focusing on a specific type that's man-made, and that's plastic polymers. So we asked you guys to bring some pipe cleaners for this activity. This is where we're going to use them. We asked that you bring 8 pipe cleaners, 6 of one color, 2 of another. But if you don't have pipe cleaners at all, or if you have less than it said in the link, that's totally okay. You can do this activity in a variety of ways. If you have Legos, you could try that. Play-Doh could work. You could even draw it on a piece of paper. So there's all sorts of ways for you to follow along if you don't have the materials. I'm going to be using some pipe cleaners, and if you guys have any questions or are struggling with it, you could look at my screen, or you could just pop a question in the chat or use the voice feature, since there's few of us enough that we can do that. So we're going to use our pipe cleaners and link them together to form 2 molecules. One of these molecules is going to be a polymer, and one of them is not going to be a polymer. And as we're doing this activity, I challenge you to think about which one's the polymer and which one's not, and also think about what the structures tell you about the molecules that they represent. And each pipe cleaner individually is going to represent just some atoms bonded together. So each pipe cleaner you could think of as its own molecule. So here's the first molecule that we're going to build. We'll take a few minutes to do this, and there's few enough of us that when you're done, you could just say in the chat that you finished, and then we'll move on from there. But here are your instructions. This one uses the two pipe cleaners that are of one color, and we'll start by cutting them in half to form two half pipe cleaners. 4 half pipe cleaners, sorry. So here I have my 4 half pipe cleaners. And now I'm going to take one of them and I'm going to make a loop and just kind of wrap it around itself. And the ends all twist together to form a really solid bond here. So get a loop like this. And if I'm going too fast or too slow, please let me know. So after you have your loop, you're going to take another one of these half pipe cleaners and you're going to wrap one end of it around the loop. So you get something that looks like this. Then you'll take the other end and you'll just wrap it around the loop again to form a little arch.
Wait, I'm still. Wait, what do we do for step 2?
For step 2, you're going to take one of the half pipe cleaners and you're just going to twist it like this. And then the ends, you're just going to twist around each other to form a loop.
Oh.
So then again, after you formed your loop, you take another pipe cleaner half and you twist it around the loop with both ends so you form a little arch. This is what that looks like. Awesome, looking good. And then this third step of making the arch, you just repeat 2 more times. So I'll do that right now. And to clarify, you repeat it on the same structure. So you're making 3 arches on the same loop. Awesome, perfect. That looks great. So this is the final product I have here. Just the loop with 3 arches. And Allison and Alana, if people are typing things in the chat, it looks like I can't. see it, so just let me know.
Yeah, Finja, she said they're done. And maybe Holden and Ruby, if you can let us know when you're ready. Oh, it looks awesome.
Oh, awesome. Perfect. Yeah. Exactly. It's better than mine.
So I think we can go on to the next step.
Awesome. So we'll build one more molecule, and then we'll come together and talk about what we think about them. This next one, you won't be cutting any pipe cleaners in half. You'll just take the whole pipe cleaner, and you'll take 3 at a time and just link them together to form a long chain, like that picture on the left there. You'll do this twice. So you'll have 2 big molecules, each 3 pipe cleaners long. Awesome. Looks great. So we have our 2 long molecules here. And the next thing you're going to do is you're just going to bring them together. So take both chains and just pull them together into one extra thick chain. Then after you do that, you're going to twist this chain around itself to form a structure of your choosing, just any random 3D structure that you want, as long as it holds its shape and that these 2 chains remain stuck together. So I'll just do that right now. And again, this could be whatever you want. And whatever you do with it, it always helps to twist the ends back onto some other part of the molecule so that the structure will hold its shape. I'll show you guys another one that I made before, just for another example of something else you could do.
How are you all doing? Do you need any more time or? A little more time is requested. Sounds good.
So if you're done already, I'd like you to consider, first of all, which one do you think is the polymer and which one is just a regular old molecule? And then also the reason that we're doing this is so we can use the properties of these substances on a molecular level to talk about how they behave in real life, the way we use and see them. So you could also think about what your pipe cleaner structures say about these things as a whole.
Looks like Ruby has completed a structure.
Awesome.
Very cool.
Great. Is that everyone? Are we?
Not quite yet.
Sure. Awesome. I love the wide variety of structures we have here. This is perfect.
And Holden, are you ready too? Awesome. I think everyone's ready.
Great. Also, thank you guys so much for having your cameras on and holding your structures up to the camera. It's really cool to see them all. And it's going to really help with our understanding of how plastics work. So I'd like you guys to share, if you're comfortable doing that, either with a voice feature or in the chat. What differences between these molecules do you notice? And which one do you think is the polymer?
I think that this is the molecule and this is the polymer. And I think that because these start out as two long strands, and that's kind of what a polymer is. So, and I also noticed that this one is a bit more, I guess it has more shape to it than this. It just is a bit more unique, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, great observation. Does anyone else have any thoughts? Well, you hit the nail on the head exactly there. The second molecule we built was the polymer. And each step you took to build that structure shows a different property of the polymers. So as you said, they're long chains of molecules. That's the first important property. That essentially is what they are. They're long chains of molecules. But then also when they get together, when you brought your 3 pipe cleaner chains together, that shows that polymers can link up and pack really tightly together. And then lastly, when you built this polymer, you folded it into a unique, complex, kind of random shape. And that's what they do as well. They tangle up with each other and form bonds in all these crazy random spots. And it's hard to predict what they look like. They just look like a tangled mess. And each formation is really unique and complex. So if you're wondering what the different properties of polymers are and you're confused about it, just think back to the steps you took to build that molecule with the pipe cleaners. That each illustrates a different property. So then what does this all tell us about plastics as a whole? Plastics are bendable and moldable, but they're really hard to break. So I asked you guys to twist the pipe cleaner ends around each other. So when you tug on the molecule, it'll be harder to break it apart. It'll be kind of hard to break it apart, but then if you just bend it, that's much easier to do. See, if I pull on it like that, it'll kind of hold its shape, but then I could bend it around and manipulate it kind of in whatever way I want. So that's what we could do with plastics. We can mold them into the shapes we like, but then when we use them, they're really hard to break, and that can even have some problems because they don't break down when we throw them out. And we'll get to that later. Another important thing that says about plastics is that the polymers, because they're all tangled up, are really just frozen in place when we use them in our daily lives. So making plastics is kind of like making spaghetti almost. So if you cook some spaghetti and you take it off the stove and you put it in a bowl, the spaghetti is all hot and you can stick a fork in it, move it around, pick out the individual pieces you want to eat. Now imagine if you freeze that spaghetti. It's going to freeze into a big block like that. You won't really be able to stick your fork in it, and you won't be able to pick out individual pieces. And that's exactly what making plastics is like, because we heat all these polymers up at really high temperatures so we can mold them into the shapes we like, but then they cool to room temperature and the polymers kind of lock together, all tangled up like this. And some plastics can be reheated and remolded, and these are called thermoplastics. They're the plastics that we can recycle. And there are also plastics that cannot be reheated. They can't be melted and reformed. Those are called thermoset plastics. So really quickly, I have a question for you guys. Where do you think it would be better to use a thermoplastic, which can be recycled and melted down? And where do you think it'd be better to use a thermoset plastic, which cannot be melted down? If you think about all the uses of plastic in our lives, where do you think these plastics fit in?
For like spatulas,
Yep.
you probably wouldn't want them to melt when you're cooking, so you'd probably use thermoset.
Yeah, exactly. If we use plastics in places where things get hot, like a spatula or a coffee maker, basically most plastic things you have in your kitchen, those are going to be thermoset plastics. We don't want those melting. And even if that means we can't recycle them, it's definitely better than producing all these plastics that are just going to melt and break right away, right? So awesome. Any other examples?
Water bottles, like the plastic kind, that you would like buy at a grocery, like at the supermarket or something. Like not the reusable ones, but the non-reusable ones.
Yeah, definitely. So I have an Nalgene that's made out of plastic polymers that are really hard and dense, and they're we don't really want to recycle them. I think they can be recycled, but you want those to be a higher density plastic that's more close to a thermoset plastic. I've gone camping and I've boiled water in it, and that works fine. And you can't really do that with all plastics. Oftentimes, water bottles we use are thermoset plastics, like the disposable ones you get at the supermarket or gas station or whatever. So yeah, that's another great example of thermoplastics versus thermoset. Thank you for sharing. So now we're going to have a little demonstration. I have with me a solution of glue and a solution of borax. Borax is a cleaning product that you can use to like scrub out sinks with, and glue is a polymer. So when we put glue into a solution, which is basically just combining it with water, and then we put borax into it, the borax is just a molecule and it's going to form cross links between the polymers. And that's just like a fancy way of saying it's going to help these polymers stick together. So all my polymers are going to be black pipe cleaners, and all my non-polymers are going to be green pipe cleaners, as you guys have already seen when we built these. So the borax molecules just link the polymers together like this and basically make bigger, longer, sturdier polymers. So my question for you guys is, when I combine borax and glue in a solution, what do you think is going to happen? And here I'll set this all up and I'll show you what it all looks like as you think of your hypotheses. And you know we got to do this right with the lab coat and get our safety goggles and PPE on.
Can I share my hypothesis?
Yeah, go for it.
I think it's gonna turn out like slime, where it's gonna be kind of goopy, but it's gonna hold its shape.
Awesome, great hypothesis. Why do you think that?
Because I've made slime before, and those are ingredients that you use.
Yeah, bingo. So we'll see this in action right now. And while it is really awesome to have a lab coat and safety goggles ready when you do this experiment, if you choose to do it at home, the PPE, the safety gloves are what's really important here, because borax, some people have reactions to it and it can irritate your hands. So we'll give you guys a link to a slime recipe that you can make by yourself, but be sure to stay safe. Ideally do it under parental supervision and have gloves ready when you do. So right here's my borax solution. See it? Stir it around to make sure it's all dissolved. This is the glue solution right here. And drop by drop, I'm going to add the borax to the glue.
Hi, Lucas. Would you be able to stop sharing your slides so we could see you a little bigger?
Yes, thank you.
Awesome, thanks.
Awesome. So we'll add a couple drops at a time here. Start stirring. See, this is what the glue looks like by itself. See, it's already starting to become more solid. And here I'm feeling much more resistance with this spoon right here. It's getting a little harder to stir. It's starting to glob together even more. Here I'm kind of having trouble stirring it because it's just sticking to the spoon. So I even have to hold the beaker down so I can stir it properly. Then eventually, as you do this more and more, you could just reach your hand in there and pick it up. So you have this ball of slime. You can just form it into any shape you want. So the polymerization of this glue essentially made it much more solid. And these polymers now are stuck in place. Think of this like a thermoset plastic, and they're not going to go back to normal. You can't really turn that glue into a liquid again. So because this polymerization happened, it's a solid now, and it can't return to its original state. So I hope that was helpful for you guys to just see visually what happens when we make polymers and what happens when we polymerize them to stick and tangle together like this. This is basically what happens with plastics. They start liquid, we heat them up, and they polymerize, and they form a solid. So we'll go back and share the presentation. Awesome. So I have a question for you guys. What are the ways that plastics impact our world positively? Again, feel free to share in the chat or just with the voice feature.
We can reuse them. We can reuse some plastics and reheat them, and it's something that we can, like wood. We can't. Once we make it into something, we can't really make it back into. We can't really reuse it as much as we can with plastic.
Definitely. Yeah. Being able to recycle plastics is a big plus and reuse them. Any other ideas? So the ways plastic impacts our world are so vast. We wouldn't have the same lives, and our world wouldn't be the same today without the impact of plastics. They're used to keep perishable items safe and fresh, as you guys have seen when you go to the grocery store to buy food. So much of it is in plastic packaging that keeps that food fresh and secure. And then it also has many other applications, like in construction projects, scientific research, medical procedures. My father recently had open heart surgery, and they put a plastic valve in his heart to replace his biological valve. So plastics have so many impacts on human health, on construction, all sorts of things. And also they're very cheap to make. So that drives down costs for us. Like when we buy foods, the plastic packaging makes it cheaper for us sometimes. And here's just a couple applications of plastics that you could see, as I mentioned, the plastic food containers at the grocery store. And then on the right here, this is Rebecca Smith. She's a scientist at the Wisconsin Energy Institute. And if you take a close look at this picture, you can see all sorts of things she uses in her lab that are made from plastics. You have these test tubes over here. You have these containers up on the shelves here. The gloves that she's using contain plastic polymers. The lab coat that she's wearing probably does. And if these are indeed safety glasses that she's wearing, those will contain plastic polymers as well. Now, a similar question for you guys. How do plastics negatively impact our world? What are some consequences that have arisen from using plastics?
We can only use, well, we can only make so much plastic, because you have to use like, I think, isn't it like petroleum or something? Like, and that's not really renewable. So it takes a long time for certain things that plastic are made of to be made naturally.
Definitely, yeah. When we go buy something that's made of plastic at the grocery store, we kind of don't really realize when we're buying it that that all comes from petroleum oil. That's something that's not really visible in our lives. We don't get to see it made like that. And the way we extract this petroleum oil can have some really harmful consequences. Any other ideas for how plastics negatively impact our world?
You just put into the chat that they are bad for the earth when they burn down.
Yes, definitely. That's a big issue we face today is how do we get rid of all this plastic that we've been using, especially since it's so disposable and so many things that we buy are just like a single-use water bottle that we throw out immediately. So you guys again hit the nail on the head. They require petroleum oil to make, and they don't break down when we throw them out. And when we do try and break them down, they can have some harmful consequences, like when we burn it or when we put it into a landfill. So here's some pictures just showing that. On the left here, we have an albatross who just ate too much plastic. And plastics, because they're made of polymers and because those polymers are so tangled together, they don't really break down, they break apart. And that can result in tiny plastics that can get into smaller places and stick around for longer. So it can have harmful consequences to the organisms that eat those plastics. And then also the way we extract this petroleum oil can have really harmful effects. This was the BP oil spill that happened in 2010. And that oil spill dumped over 4.9 million barrels of oil into the water here. And we had to organize so many cleanup efforts, and it took years and years and years, and it's arguably still ongoing, that we're trying to get this oil out of the ecosystem and remediate all the damage that we've done to these organisms living there. But also, plastics have been so useful to us that we can't just stop making them. We have to balance using them sustainably and disposing of them in a proper way, and also using them for all the things we use them for in daily life. So then bioplastics, this is where bioplastics come in. They're made from biological material. So imagine that when you're done eating, you can throw your food out, and that food and the molecules within that food can be used to make plastics instead of just going to waste. So they're made of molecules that we find in plants. And they're also sometimes easier to dispose of. There are many different types of bioplastics being made right now. Some you can recycle, and some you could even just throw in your compost. And this all goes to show that they're more sustainable. They're a more sustainable version of the plastics that we use every day. And now I'd like to take the rest of the time today to tell you guys about a really cool project going on at the Wisconsin Energy Institute. So scientists here are genetically modifying, they're changing the DNA of this little microbe called Novosphingobia aromaticivirans. If you guys have a good idea for a common name that's easier to say, let us know. And this organism basically eats lignin, which is found in plants, and it's something that's not really useful. Lignin just goes to waste whenever you use plants. It takes this lignin and it eats it, and it produces PDC as a waste product. And what PDC is just a plastic polymer that we can use to make bioplastics out of. So here, just to continue with a pipe cleaner analogy, imagine this is lignin. It's this kind of crazy, complex molecule, lots of stuff in here, lots going on here. And for a long time, scientists have been wondering how to break it apart and get useful compounds from it. So you see there's this little section of it that's black here. And what this microbe can do is it can go in there and extract this little tiny piece from lignin and use it to make entire plastic polymers. So just to illustrate that process, here we have this picture. You can see on the left here, this is switchgrass. That's a crop that the Wisconsin Energy Institute is studying because they think it could be really good to get lignin from to make these bioplastics. So they extract the lignin from it, and then they introduce this microbe to it. And don't worry about the chemical structure of these things here. That's not very important. But what I want to show is the microbes go into this big molecule and they pick out this little tiny piece from it. And it's really an incredible thing that scientists can modify the DNA of this organism so that they can take out this little tiny piece just in their process of eating this lignin. And then after they do that, we can make plastics that we use every day, such as water bottles, all sorts of plastic containers, nylon. It could even be used to make vanilla food flavoring, which I think is really cool. And I'll go back for a second here. This is not just a single process done by scientists, right? We need people to grow this switchgrass and research how to grow it the most effectively. Oh yeah, Holden, do you have a question?
How'd they even collect this stuff? How'd they even collect the end result?
To make the plastic.
Yeah.
How did they, collect the lignin, you mean?
Like from
Or
the
PDC?
Yeah. After it eats it, how does it?
Yeah, there are all sorts of chemical reactions that scientists can do that essentially separate the different molecules in a big container. So by processes of wide variety of processes, sometimes they like spin it around in a big centrifuge to separate different molecules by their mass. There are all sorts of ways they could separate it, but essentially PDC and the microbe and any other sort of molecules that could be floating around in there, they all have different mass, and that could be used to separate them and get what we need from it. And then the way they get the PDC, again, is just through a biological process of just eating the lignin and then pooping out the PDC. That's essentially all that is. And then this, so this grass has to be grown by farmers or scientists or whoever. We have to get people to extract this lignin. We have to get people to genetically modify the DNA of this microbe. We have to get people to extract the PDC. We need people to make the contraptions that allow us to do all these things. And we need the people to mold the plastic polymers into the things we use every day. And we even need the people to stock them on the shelves for us to buy, right? Or put them into the electronics that we use, or put them into you if you're getting an operation that requires a plastic piece. So that just goes to show that this isn't something just done by scientists at a university. What I hope you could take away from this is that everyone can have a part in transitioning to a system where we use more bioplastics and more sustainably made plastics. We need the geneticists, again, to genetically modify the DNA of this thing. And then we need the tradespeople to build all the metal structures and plastic structures that we need to do this. We need educators like me and Allison and Alana to spread the word and tell people, like, this plastic is more sustainably made than this plastic. Maybe you should buy this container of strawberries instead of this one or something. Then we need people studying economics to see how can we introduce bioplastics and make them into products in a way that people will want to buy them, and that makes them not as expensive as the other plastics that we use. So there are all sorts of academic studies and walks of life that go into this process of making bioplastics. And there's a place for everyone here. Even in your daily life, when you go to the store and buy something, you have a part in this process of producing bioplastics and making them more marketable to everyone so we can all use them and hopefully save the earth in the process. So I just have some questions for you guys to debrief this whole activity and learn what you're thinking about bioplastics, and about this cool project going on at WEI. So you could pick any of these questions to answer and just share. What would you like to see being made out of bioplastics? What would you love about living in a future where we always use bioplastics? And what changes can you make in your own life to reduce the environmental effects of plastics? And what changes would you like to see the world make as a whole? So we could take a minute, just if you have a reaction to any of these questions, feel free to share.
I'd like to see like bikes being made out of bioplastics or like parts of bikes. I think that would be kind of cool.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, lots of plastic pieces go into bikes that definitely don't need a specific type of plastic to function correctly, right? So many little pieces like the handlebars can be made out of bioplastics, all sorts of things. And I also like that because it incentivizes the use of bikes instead of cars.
Can I ask you a question quick too?
Of course.
How long do you think it will be until like using bioplastics is common?
It depends on what you mean by common. We're already seeing these bioplastics used a lot. There are some places where you could buy water bottles made out of bioplastics. At the Wisconsin Energy Institute, when we do in-person activities, we have Legos made out of bioplastics that we like to show people. So I don't think it'll be very long at all because we're already starting to see them happen all over the world.
I also wanted to ask, how much how much oh gosh, now I forgot what it's called. The bioplastic polymer. How much would you need to make like a water bottle or something? Is it a lot or is it not very much?
Well, plastics are essentially made out of all polymers, and those polymers are each like very tiny. They're molecules. They're tiny because they're molecules, but they're still really big for molecules. Based on the research that the Wisconsin Energy Institute has done so far, we can produce quite a bit of bioplastic from the process of turning lignin into PETC. We need to introduce other plastic polymers to make that work right now, but essentially it is a lot, but it's doable. We can produce that much given the amount of lignin that we just toss and burn and let go to waste, and the amount of scientific innovation that we're seeing.
I have a quick question, actually, Lucas, if that's okay.
Definitely.
You know what part of the plant the lignin is usually found in? Is it like the stalk or like the stem, or is there? Yeah.
Yeah, so lignin is basically what makes plants woody and hard. It's found in the cell wall of plants. So it's kind of everywhere in the plant, but you'll see it especially in the stalk, just like pieces of wood. Those are very lignin heavy parts of the plant. So the harder the part of the plant is, the more lignin it contains, basically. And you could just like imagine how much of that goes to waste then, right? In trees and all the plants that we grow, like corn stalks and things, so much of like the stalk of the plant makes up like so much of its biomass, and that goes to waste all the time. So there's so much lignin out there, and it's so common that we really won't have much trouble getting a hold of it to make bioplastics with. Awesome. Any other thoughts or questions? Awesome. Sorry, I went a couple of minutes over, but thank you guys so much again for being here today and for being willing to learn about bioplastics and sharing your thoughts and the pipe cleaner structures that you built. And we'll send out the link to this so you can contact us at this email or the Wisconsin Energy Institute or GLBRC websites. Then you could also make your own slime if you're so inclined. Thank you all again for coming. Have a great Friday.
Thanks, everybody. I put the link to Lucas's presentation in the chat if you're interested in pulling up that slime recipe or want to be able to click on our websites.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. Bye.
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 Have a good day.